I'm Clarence Whitney, the proprietor of King's Castle Inn. We opened King's Castle Inn in 1968, my family and I, and we ran it through until 1994. When I was 15, and I didn't remember this, but a good friend of ours who we're friends with still today, he and I, we were about 15 years old, and I told him, one day I'm going to have the biggest toy store on the South Shore. It was obviously in my mind to do that. I had a toy store in Brockton on East Ashland Street, Hideaway Toys, and it was a very remote location, and I was looking for a good routed road where people could find me easily, and I come upon King's Castle that happened to be for sale at that time, and so it made a natural complement to each other to put the toy store on the property along with the amusement park. They were two businesses that complemented each other because of the seasonal aspect. When we bought the property originally, there was a house right down in the front here behind this building, which was then a restaurant, and there was a house right behind it. But we then tore that down and moved up back. When we built the store in '71, then we moved everything over from Brockton to King's Castle. Without this little girl, I would have never had King's Castle. This is my wife of 64 years, Paula.
And you never grew up. That's why you...
That's true. We had a total of 20,000 square feet, 10,000 foot on the first deck and 10,000 up overhead, which was basically our offices and storage. We had all the major brands, Ideal, Fisher-Price, Milton Bradley. We carried them all. That was the era of discount stores. They were all the competition at that time, and Child World was coming onto the scene also. So it wasn't an easy task to open amongst the giants, but somehow or another we fought our way up through it. Believe it or not, if you walked into a Child World and they didn't have something, they would say to the people, go down to King's Castle, they'll probably have it. When we purchased the property, King's Castle was 4.5 acres, and I was fortunate to buy a piece of adjoining property, 2.5 acres, that I added to the property, and we had a total of 7 acres. The original entry actually was right over here, right alongside the toy store here and enter. Things that we added, the entryway, my son designed this building and we built it. It had a candy shop on one side of it and a gift store on the other side, and of course the ticket booth to go into the park. Of course, as you went across the drawbridge, there was alligator, and you could stand at the drawbridge and press a button and the alligator's mouth would open and close. And another feature we had was the drinking lion yell in his mouth and the water would start coming out. Another piece that we built was the slide house, which had a maze underneath it. The kids could crawl through the maze and all. And the refreshment stand, we built that in 1969. We had pizzas and hot dogs and hamburgers, and of course popcorn and cotton candy. We put the petting zoo in probably 1975. We used to have lambs and goats, cows and ducks and things like that. This building here, called the Drum Theater, was a theater originally. We turned it into an arcade. And then we built that building up and back, which is the game room. And that had the skee balls, and it had 3 or 4 little games you could play. Of course, we had the fire-breathing dragons. The original owner built those. He was very clever with stucco. Built the whale out of stucco and the dragons. They were just all hand done. In the belly of one dragon was a container for the oil, and in the other dragon, of course, was fed, and it had an oil burner gun in the mouth, and that's what you would see blowing the flames out. And that would go on every 3 minutes. It was a big attraction. Down in the back corner where the dragons were, there was a fallen giant, and that was a huge giant that went down in 1964 in a hurricane. Rather than destroy it, he took and fixed it up, and the kids used to run over it. Then later on, we put another giant down there right next to it, and up in the back we had a William Tell with his bow and arrow. And then we bought Paul Bunyan. And that was an interesting story. I used to go by a place in Revere, gasoline company that used them for promotion. So I went in and I spoke to him. I said, those things are going to pot out there, and I said I could really use one of them, and I told him about the pack and all. All right, he says, we'll sell you one. So we were fortunate. We picked out the best one, and we had to do a few repairs on it, but we brought it home. It's 24 foot high. And we also had a knight who stood there, and you stood on the mat and he'd talk to you. Fantasy was the name of the game. When we bought it, it had 2 little rides, and when we ended up, we had 14 rides. Mr. King, who established the park in 1946, it was a small park. He had 2 rides when we bought it. The 2 rides originally were the monkey cage ride and on the pond, and there was a big pond out in the front here. This was all pond, and we had a ferry boat ride. Those were the 2 rides originally. And one of the first things we put in on the pond after the ferry boat was paddle boats, and that was extremely popular. Well, then as we grew, we had no parking area. And so we got permission to fill in the pond and reduce the size of it because we just needed the parking so bad. Every year we would try to add a ride. We ended up with 14 rides after 24 years of operation. The swing ride was the first ride we purchased, actually, and I bought it from Larry Stone at Paragon Park. He was discontinuing the ride, and it fit right into our format, and that was our very first ride. Then came the train. It was over a half-mile of train track that we laid down ourselves with the help of a couple of fellows that used to work at Edaville on their train. They come up and helped us lay the track out, and we got a train ride going. And the first train we put in was an 1865, an old steam train, and that burned up in a fire. We had some vandalism and we lost the train, and so I had to get out and find another train, but I found one down on Long Island. Came out of an old amusement park, and refurbished it and put it in, and it worked out wonderful. Then after that, we bought a small merry-go-round. We weren't too happy with the small one, so we bought a real big one later on. But in that interim, we added the Ferris wheel, bumper cars. We had a tilt-a-whirl. Hard to remember them all. We bought the roller coaster in '83. My wife and I went to New Orleans for the amusement show, and we walked into this hall, and they had this dragon coaster all set up there. And I saw that, and I said to Paula, I said, we gotta have it. That's us right there. And that was probably the most popular ride we ever had. We would open, generally speaking, about the 1st of May, and from the 1st of May until the 1st of June, we would entertain school groups from all over the Boston area, the South Shore, all the way down to New Bedford. We would entertain probably in the area of 10,000 kids, I'd say, from all the various schools and groups. And then on the 1st of June, we'd open full-time. And we'd be open full-time from then until Labor Day. After Labor Day, we'd be open weekends pretty much through the end of October, weather permitting. And you could come to the park at that time with 6 of these little 10-cent coupons, and you can buy a popcorn, a cold drink, a hot dog, a balloon, a ride on the monkey cage, and a ride on the swing ride. And it exploded. It brought us people from everywhere. That was the best thing we did in promotion. One of the things that kept us going was the 2 businesses. We had the toy business and the amusement business. One without the other was pretty tough to run. But with the 2 things, one supported the other. When one was down, the other was up. One of the nice things about having the 2 businesses was I could keep a continuity of help flowing. The people, 10 or 12 important people that worked for us, also worked in the toy store. So we moved them back and forth. In the summer, we would hire about 40 youngsters out of school to work in the amusement park. One of the favorite things I like to tell people about running the park was one of my favorite memories is that all of the young people that we hired over those years, they were wonderful. We never had a bad kid. They were good kids, every one of them. And we still have a lot of, I'd say 20 or 30 of them that we're in touch with, even now, 20 years later. This all came about, every year the kids would buy me something for Christmas related to the amusement park. And all of a sudden I had all this stuff kind of gathering up and didn't have enough room for it. And so I said to one of my boys, I said, I said, I'm going to build a platform and put this all on a platform. So my son Edward came over and he built the platform actually for me. And then my son came back, and he was very good at doing the scenery, so he did the grass and the pathways and all of that. And then I went on to do all the houses and all the building. All of this was all handwork that you see here. And the pictures you see on the refreshment stand are my family, my mom and dad, who worked with us, and our 5 children, my daughter and 4 sons. They were all part of it. They all grew up in the business. This is a replica of the fun house that many people would remember. And the fun house, you could get in it and roll it around, and that was a great attraction. This is interesting here. This is the ride house, and people would remember this maybe. It had these little coin-operated rides, and they were great for little kids, 2 or 3 years old. You put them on that because they'd get scared on some of the big rides. So this was a beginning ride for many youngsters. And the pumpkin and Noah's Ark and the little chapel up in the back, the house of sticks and the house of bricks and the house of straw from the 3 little pigs and the 3 bears house, and you go on through them all. This has taken 2.5 years. I used to come down every day, and I still come down and poke around with it, but I used to come down every day and work on something. I wished I'd made it another 2 foot deeper, but then when I got there, I would have wished I'd been out here too, so.